The largest Pokemon regional of all time was held this past weekend in Charlotte, North Carolina. With an incredible 845 players on the video game side of things, today we are going to break down the results of this tournament in our normal snapshot based approach, so let's jump into it. First off, congratulations to Wolf Glick for his 8th regional championship title. That is absolutely incredible. And followed suit by Incineroar's first big win in Scarlet and Violet. Now, this is massive, and we're going to talk about Incineroar a little bit because we saw it in Portland. It didn't really have that great of a showing. It had a decent showing, but it didn't have that like classic Incineroar style showing. And similar here in Charlotte, we don't have that classic Incineroar style showing, right? You see it in first and one more in top 8 and only 2 in top 8. That is not an Incineroar style showing. You know, back in the day when this Pokemon first got Intimidate and it was around, you would see it maybe 5 of the 6 top 8 teams would have that Incineroar on it. But we're just not seeing that anymore, right? However, it is still an incredibly strong option. Wolf opted for that safety goggles variant to help support his team. And just all in all, the Pokemon is still really strong. Despite not seeing it nearly as much as it used to, you're still seeing it a lot more often than some of the other Pokemon in this game. It is definitely having a strong showing. All the talk of Incineroar sucks now. Oh, Incineroar has fallen. The king has fallen. Don't let them sway you guys. This Pokemon is still incredibly strong. Not quite as like, oh, I don't have a 6th slot. Let's throw an Incineroar anymore. You can't really just slap it. But it is still an incredibly strong mon. And you see that here with it winning the regional alongside Wolf. Now, we got to talk about Farigiraf, okay, guys? We see 2 first and second place. We see 3 in top 4. We see another one in top 16 on Jody's team. And just all in all, this Pokemon is so weird to me, okay? Because it's very similar to Gastron in a way. Because we saw this Pokemon and we saw it in the regional dex format, right, in regulation A and B, and we didn't really see too much of it. You saw it here or there, okay, it didn't really do much, but then as the format became more powerful, more priority based, right, you see Farigiraf utilizing that incredibly broken ability of its, and it's just absolutely dominating these regionals, and you see it here in Charlotte. To me, this reminds me of Gastron. You know, Gastron is a Pokemon that doesn't really see too much usage, but then all of a sudden big water type attackers come out, especially in those restrictive formats like the Kyogre, and all of a sudden Gastron is one of the best Pokemon in the format because you're capable of shutting down one of the strongest strategies in the format. Similar to this, as we saw in Portland, that priority spam with the Entei and the Dragonite and the Shenpao, right? You don't see that here, and that is because of the rise of Farigiraf. And this is exactly why Farigiraf is getting first and second at this regional. It is utilizing its mediocre base stats, but its incredible ability to counter one of the best strategies in the game, which was that Shenpao Entei priority spam, Raging Bolt stuff, right? And you're seeing it here. You're seeing it used to success because that was common, right? As the meta starts shifting away from the priority spam because the Farigiraf starts appearing, Farigiraf is gonna fall off because there's gonna be less need to have the ability to stop those priority moves. Now, obviously, Farigiraf is still an incredibly good mon. I'm not calling it bad by any means. However, the way the meta was shaping up, I'm not surprised that it had this big finish. And the longer the meta stays the way it's at right now, the less you're gonna see of Farigiraf because you're not really stopping all that priority. Granted, though, as long as there's priority in stuff like Grassy Glide, as long as there's Sucker Punch from Shenpao, you're still going to be a good Pokemon. So you're still going to see it, but I'm not sure if we're going to see 3 in top 4 for next little bit, right? Just the main priority spam has fallen off. We'll talk about Entei because there was, 4 in top 4 in day 2, maybe. I think there was only 2 in top 32. Like, where did Entei go? That was the talk of the town after Portland. But we'll get into that in a bit. But Gouging Fire is another Pokemon I want to talk about. I personally ran Gouging Fire at this event. This Pokemon has seen a lot of uptick in usage as of late. We see it here in top 4 as well with Luca's team. And it's just one of those Pokemon that you don't expect to be as good as it actually is. Because you see here the Gouging Fire, it's very similar to that Roaring Moon team or the Jamie Boyd Roaring Moon team from Toronto, where you have that really fast support piece and every move you're clicking is supporting your team, right? With that Roaring Moon, you had the breaking swipe, you had the knockoff, you had the tailwind, right? Every move you were clicking was supporting your team. And very similarly put, same with this gouging fire, every move you are clicking is supporting your team. Granted, Heat Crash, not quite the same, but it puts on a little bit more pressure immediately, especially when you pair it with Howl. This team is really, really cool because fast gouging fire gives you, okay, you don't have Intimidate on a team, but it's fine because you have basically the fastest breaking swipe user in the format, and you're just going to basically intimidate them without actually intimidating them, right? So obviously you do need to have it on the field. You can't just like switch it in and all of a sudden it's an Intimidate. So there's still some downfalls to it, not quite the same, but it is still definitely a really, really strong piece. I think being able to Howl is really, really strong as well. Just like pairing this beside Shen Pao, Rillaboom, King Gambit, Ogerpon, right? All these physical attackers, you want to intimidate them. Now you Howl and they go back to neutral. If you don't have Intimidate, they go up to +1. And if you do have Intimidate, do you really want to bring it versus a King Gambit that's actually going to just take advantage of the fact that, oh, thanks for the Intimidate, I'm now at +1, right? Then you have the ability to Swords Dance here. Luca opted for the Black Glasses version. I will point out, he did say after the event that Terra Dragon was what he wanted to go. I'm not sure if it was lack of practice time. He did say he didn't have a chance. I think it was fully lack of practice time with the Terra Dragon. He was comfortable with Terra Dark, so he stuck with that for the event. But he was saying that Terra Dragon felt a little bit better in the limited testing that he did get in with it, so that's just something to point out. But overall, this team is really, really cool. Gouging Fire is incredibly, incredibly slept on, okay? Like, it's just one of those Pokemon that you don't expect to do that well, because you look at it and a lot of people were testing like the clear amulets, the dragon dances, the rocky helmets, right? But having that ability to just be that fast, drop those breaking swipes right off the bat is really, really strong for Gouging Fire. And you're going to see teams like Luca's emerge as this format develops, right? It's similar. It's almost, I hate calling it a balanced team. It's a very aggressive form of a balanced team, right? Because you have your key balance elements. You know, you've got your Redirector in Ogerpon. You've got a setup mod if you want it in King Gambit. Then you have your support pieces. You've got your Fake Out. You've got your Firewater Grass Core. You got your Fairy Steel Dragon Core. There's so many elements of balance on this Gouging Fire team. It is really, really cool. You're going to see it around some different variations of it, but speed boosting Gouging Fire has been incredibly, incredibly strong and had a really good showing at this tournament. Dark Urshifu. This is one of those ones where I feel like people forget that there's a second form of Urshifu, because for whatever reason, nobody had answers to this. Obviously, it's a very good mon, but you see when people start saying, oh, I'm going to counter Urshifu, they start putting like the Ogerpon waters, they put those grass types on. And yeah, okay, you beat the water one, but the dark one is still here, guys, okay? Dark Urshifu converted very, very well into day 2. Obviously, it was on both the day 1 and the day 2 usage stats chart, which is absolutely incredible. It actually out percentage your usage water Urshifu in day 2, which is just really, really wild to see. Like, it's one of those mons where you look at it and it's like, yeah, that's a good mon, but you don't realize how limiting it actually is, because there's not too many things that actually resist the Wicked Blow. The only fairy type in the format is Fluttermane, which is neutral unless you force the Terra. And if you're forcing a Fluttermane to Terra you just to knock you down to Sash before you hit it back with a big old Wicked Blow, right, you are doing a ton of damage with this Pokemon. You get a ton of value out of it. And you can see that on Tailwind teams. I believe Enzo had Dark Urshifu. He did, right? And you see that here, right? You have that Tailwind. You have that immediate pressure off of this Urshifu. Now, Choice Band and Focus Sash are two very strong options on the Urshifu. Enzo here, of course, rocking the Choice Band. It's incredible. Puts on so much pressure. You can just click Tailwind and Wicked Blow, and you can probably just take a piece off the field, right? If they've led incorrectly, you are taking pieces off the field. They cannot protect to stall out turns of Tailwind because you are hitting through the protect. It is incredibly, incredibly strong. Now, you pair that with a very aggressive Blood Moon. You pair that with a very aggressive or a more so aggressive Goldango, right? The Metal Coat, in my opinion, those versions tend to be a little bit more aggressive, especially with the Terra Steel, right? Yes, they have Nasty Plot still, so it's not quite as sended as the Choice specs, but they definitely have that immediate pressure without that Nasty Plot. So really, really cool team here. One of the only Entei's in day 2 for that matter. It's just really crazy. That's almost a perfect segue into what we're talking about in a second. But Urshifu, guys, Dark Urshifu, it just does so much, and people forget about it. It's like I said, it's one of those mons people are like, oh yeah, Urshifu, it's a water type. We'll just deal with our grass types. And then you throw Dark Urshifu in, and Wicked Blow hits everything on your team for 75% of your health, and you're like, oh, right. So really, really good Pokemon. I think it's probably falling off a little bit, or going to fall off a little bit as the meta develops, because now we see that, oh hey, Dark Urshifu is real. Let's calm down here. Let's make sure we have our answers to it. But it is still a very, very strong Pokemon. Just Wicked Blow is incredible. Incredible damage, right? And really, really quickly, in the Portland Regional recap, I was saying Ogerpon Water looked like the best Pokemon in the format. And it's still here. You see it up here. You see it here. Keep going, right? You can point out all the Ogerpon Waters, because why not? But I'm not going to do that. We are going to talk about Ogerpon Fire, because we didn't see that in Portland all that much. Yeah, here it is, striking back with a vengeance, getting first and second, just like Farigiraf did, right? And you also see it on Toller's team in top 8 as well. It's a lot of the times now people... I don't know where to go with this one. I'm going to be honest here. I don't know why Ogerpon Fire is back in the meta. It just kind of is. It's just kind of here. Obviously, you have the immediate fire damage, the immediate pressure, but I don't know. It just Entei got a bad rep. Okay, Entei just had a terrible tournament. Obviously, everybody was bringing those Farigiraphs, but it's one of those ones where all of a sudden people are exploring other fire types, and they recognize that Entei was falling off and they needed a different fire type. They wanted something heavy hitting that could also do some other things, like have that redirection potential. Because now you have a heavy hitting piece that can also have a redirection, right? Whereas Ogerpon is more of the redirection that can also hit offensively, right? Like hitting offensively is the second mode for Ogerpon Water, whereas Ogerpon Fire, you're going to be hitting hard, and your secondary mode is I'm going to redirect, right? Which definitely helps you set Trick Room. It gives you the option of leading like Farigiraf, Ogerpon Fire, and then saying, well, I can either blow something up with my Ogerpon Fire, or if I feel that I want to get Trick Room up, I can just redirect if I really feel the need to, keep my Giraffe alive, let my Ogerpon go, get the Trick Room up. I think it's really, really cool beside that Giraffe, and you see it here on Toller's team without the Giraffe. I don't know if Toller had Trick Room on Indeedee, and they did. You can't see it here, but it is Trick Room on that Indeedee. It's a really, really cool team here as well. Something Iron Crown is probably something I'm not going to talk too much about in today's video, but it did have a good showing at the tournament, right? Like there was a good chunk of them in day 2. They did perform fairly well, so it's decent, right? It's definitely a good mon. It's definitely a mon to consider, right? It's a psychic type that can actually deal with Shenpao, which you don't see too often. More often than not, Shenpao is capable of just dealing with those psychic types. But being able to deal with Shenpao with the Iron Crown is incredibly strong. Tachyon Cutter breaking through that as well. Just so much damage output from Iron Crown, especially with the ability to capitalize off of the Psychic Surge with Expanding Force. It's a mon that you need to know how to play around. I don't know if it's the best mon in the format, but it is very respectable and a very strong option as well. Moving on, though, we do need to talk about some of these usage stats, okay? We had, specifically, I want to look at Shenpao, I want to look at Entei, and I want to look at Amoonguss. These are the 3. And I'm not really going to go too far into details here, but Shenpao had 29% usage in day 1 of the tournament. And on day 2, it was not on the usage list. It actually did fall to 10 out of 75 players using Shenpao that made day 2. That is only 13%. Now, obviously, that's not like that much of a fall off. 13% still feels really strong. It's not like it disappeared from the face of the earth. But when you start day 1 at 29% and you fall to 13%, that shows that most of the pool was ready to deal with Shenpao. Whether or not it was ready to deal with Shenpao by able to effectively dealing with it, maybe a couple of them got unlucky, right? These numbers are very tough. Looking at the numbers, you don't know why so many fell off, right? But with a jump this big, you can definitely say that people were ready for Shenpao at this tournament, whether it's with your Tachyon Cutter, whether it's with Incineroar. There was a Sui and Arcanine as well. I think that's really strong into Shenpao as well. Ogerpon Fire was generally pretty good into it, right? You had the Gouging Fire, the Rise in Gouging Fire, drop that off as well, right? And normally when you're looking at the differences in usages between day 1 and day 2, right? If it's around the same percentage, right? It's pretty normal, right? Like sometimes it'll do a little bit better, sometimes it'll do a little bit worse. That's pretty normal. Like, right? Like from Fluttermane going from 61, I think, to 68 or something like that. It was I don't know the exact numbers, but it was close to that. And that's normal, right? You expect a little bit of variance between day 1 and day 2, right? I believe Incineroar went from 28 to 30, or or something along those lines, right? You expect it to be similar, right? But when it goes up in usage by a long shot, that is a really, really strong performance, right? That's saying, hey, not a lot of people brought this to the event, but the people that did bring it to the event are seeing success with it. And then obviously the reverse of that is if the number drops off and it's, hey, hold up a second, like in this Shenpao's case, why did this number go down so much? And once again, this time I just think people were ready for Shenpao, right? People were ready. Shenpao was used on those Entei teams. People were ready for the Entei and the Dragonite, right? We already talked about the Farigiraf. We've seen people be prepared for that Pokemon, and it just fell off. Like, it's still a good Pokemon. 13% is nothing to laugh at. It's still a really good showing. We see it here on Lucas' team in top 4. We also see it a couple more times throughout top 16 as well. So it's still a very strong Pokemon, but it definitely is not what it once was, where it was just ruling the metagame. Similar with Entei. Entei, 20% day 1 usage, which is probably about what I'd expect from an inner focus mod. Been really strong in the meta, and I do think it's still a really good mod. But in day 2, there were 2 in top 32 and a 5% usage across all of day 2. That is rather low. That is a massive drop off from where it was before, right? Once again, people were ready for Entei in this time, right? Do I think it's a bad mod? Absolutely not. But in this scenario, everybody just seemed ready for it, right? You had the breaking swipe, that uptick in gouging fire. People kind of knew it was around. People were ready for it, right? You see on the Wolf and Nicholas team, right? Wolf had that, Wolf had the water Urshifu. The fire pawn as well puts on a little bit of pressure into it because, like, you can't burn it and you don't get that added value of burning it, right? Wolf also had the very aggressive Farigiraf, which I think was a very good call with Throat Spray, because normally when I see a Farigiraf, I just kind of ignore it. And it's like, okay, I can let it get Trick Room up as long as I keep the Pokemon beside it that's in check. If I can keep that in check, Farigiraf isn't too much of a threat. But if you start ignoring Wolf's Farigiraf, it starts putting on damage. And I think that's the problem. That's kind of how Wolf, in my opinion, would have dealt with Entei, right? Like, it doesn't look like it's a problem matchup for him, right? You got the Urshifu, then you also have the Trick Room mode, and you just start spamming Hyper Voice. That damage is going to add up, right? You have Ogerpon to redirect away so they can't really just successfully Sacred Fire burn your Urshifu, right? You have a lot of options there on Wolf's team, right? But people were starting to get ready. We saw the rise of Glamora as well in this tournament. That was putting on big damage out into Entei as well, right? Just so many things that were ready for Entei. People realized how to play around it. We had some rain teams as well do pretty well. But overall, it's still not a bad mon, guys, but everybody was ready for that priority spam. Everybody was ready for that E-speed spam. So having Shenpao and Entei kind of fall off together makes a lot of sense. One other Pokemon that I really want to talk about really quickly just before we wrap up is Amoonguss. Okay, Amoonguss had 18% usage in day 1, which is really strong, right? Amoonguss has always been one of those staple mons in the format. But unlike Entei and Shenpao, this Pokemon actually jumped up from 18% day 1 usage to a 34% day 2 usage. And that is incredible. That is showing that everybody, or more often than not, the people that brought Amoonguss to this tournament performed really well with it on that day 1, right? And it's just one of those Pokemon that's going to be around, guys, okay? People are like, oh, Ogerpon is better than Amoonguss, and in a sense, yeah, it can be. In certain aspects, it is. But you're actually starting to see Ogerpon Water and Amoonguss together now. I personally ran that myself. We see Neil over here in top 8 with Ogerpon and Amoonguss because they can provide different value. You see it as well on Will's team in top 16. You see it on Ragov's team as well. You see it on Paul Chua's team as well. People are starting to realize how good these two are together, because before it was like, oh, I have 2 grass type redirectors. Just doesn't feel right. But people are now able to either utilize this in more ways than one. You can say, hey, I no longer need to force Ogerpon in here as my redirector, or hey, you know what, my redirector, I want to be able to redirect still, but I want more pressure in this matchup, so I can go Ogerpon. Or ooh, Ogerpon's not that great here, let's have my redirection with Amoonguss still. And then Amoonguss, of course, as always, just buys you turns with Spore. But seeing it beside Ogerpon Water was really surprising to me. When I added it to my team, I was like, this probably isn't going to work. But as I played more, it just felt really strong. And Amoonguss is just one of those pieces that's always been around, gets around some of those Glamora, clears the spikes in case you do hit that Glamora early as well. We saw the uptick in Dozo in Portland and the uptick in Dondozo after Portland as well. We don't really see it here. I think people were pretty prepared for Dondozo now, right? There is a lot of tools in the metagame that deal with Dondozo, and having the run it did at Portland, people were ready for it going into Charlotte for Dondozo, right? And I think Amoonguss is one of the reasons that's why it was here so much. It's because people were ready for Dondozo, right? People wanted to make sure they had their answers into it. They wanted to be able to clear the spikes from Glamora, maybe put things to sleep, right? Amoonguss, really, really strong option. Really, really quickly, we saw some Archaludons. It's almost time for me to sign the Archaludon apology form, guys. It is getting some pretty decent showings, right? I didn't think this mon was really going to get past that whole 6-3 barrier. It does a lot of good things, but I don't know if it does a lot of good things enough. And obviously, it's doing well, so maybe it is good. Maybe it is good. We see a few Porygon 2s scattered throughout top 16 and top 32 as well. I'm very intrigued to see if that actually takes off. But having that Trick Room mode as well, and we see it here, right? We see that clear-cut form of speed control on a lot of these teams now, right? We got the 2 Trick Rooms. We got Tailwind, 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 right? We start to see that clear form of speed control as opposed to just spamming those priority moves. And with the priority moves falling off, dedicated speed control becoming back, maybe having that Porygon 2 as a Trick Room setter becomes that much more viable now. I am going to stop talking now because I feel like we rambled on a tad bit, but that pretty much covers a lot of what was happening at the Charlotte Regional Championships this past weekend, guys. If you guys think I missed any big insights, please feel free to let me know in the comments down below. But with that, that's going to do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will catch you all in a future video.